This first vocabulary in geometry is so important because everything that we build this year is going to be based off of these basic building blocks. So the first one we're going to talk about is a point. A point is just a spot in space. It's represented by a dot. It's very tiny, a tiny circle. In fact, it has no size. If you were standing on a point, you wouldn't be able to go anywhere because it is a single point. We actually say that it's zero-dimensional. And how do we name a point? Like, how would we decide that's that point and that's another point? We use it naming a capital letter. So we just pick our favorite capital letter, and maybe this is point R. And so we drew a point, we labeled it as point R, and then we can name it point R. Or when we get a little more advanced, if you just see a capital letter, you'll know that they're talking about a point. Next is a line. You've graphed a ton of lines. Usually you would graph at least 2 points, 3 to be safe, but at least 2 points, and draw a nice straight line between those. And we know that lines are, first of all, straight. I really won't say straight line anymore because that's really what we understand a line to be. It is never ending. And even though my pen has a little bit of thickness, a line technically has no thickness. Just like a point has no size. So there's no thickness, but you can go east-west or whatever, and so we consider it to be one-dimensional. There's a forward-backward sort of motion. And then to name a line, we can either choose any 2 points that are on the line, because through any 2 points there's only one line, or we could use a lowercase letter. So on this diagram, let's say that's point A and this is point B. We could name that line line AB. And we use the symbol with 2 arrows on the top for line AB. The order doesn't matter, so BA would be just as good. We would know that we're talking about the one line that goes through points B and A. And then for the lowercase letter, if I wanted to just keep this simple, I would put a lowercase letter near one of the arrows on the picture, and then I could just call that line lowercase r, or whatever lowercase letter you choose. I know you've seen rays before. A ray kind of looks like this. It has a point on one end and then it extends infinitely in one direction. So it's a point extending in one direction. It's like sort of one chunk of a line, right? A chunk of a line. Very precise here. What is used to name rays? We can again use 2 points, but we'll always use that initial point as the first point that we name. Do you know that they actually don't call that the initial point? They call it the end point. And I guess it's called the end point because a ray only has one end. The other one is infinite. So we use the end point and any other point that's on the ray. So I could pick one here or here or here or here. It doesn't matter as long as I just choose one point that's also on this ray. Again, points are going to be named with capital letters. So if this was point E for end point, let's say, and this is another point, I'll use a capital R since it's a point. I would name that, start with the end point, ray ER. And I always put the line on top like this. Only one arrow when we're naming a ray. And we never reverse that order. We always have that ray pointing to the right, and we always begin with that end point. So that's really our only option for naming ray ER. A line segment. A line segment is also a chunk of a line, but it doesn't go on infinitely, right? It doesn't go on infinitely. It actually has a set distance. Like you could measure it. It's measurable. And the way that we name it is by those two endpoints. This one has two endpoints. There might be other points between them, but if we're talking about this entire segment, I would want to label those two capital letter points on each side, and I could call this segment AB. And the order doesn't matter on a line segment. I could also call that segment BA. You'll notice I'm not putting like chunky points on the top of that. It's just a bar that goes on top, and then everybody understands that we mean a line segment. All right, next, when we think of a plane, we should think about a big flat surface. So I always think of the floor as being a nice plane, except for in geometry, a plane is never ending. You have to imagine it going on infinitely. And we used to graph on a coordinate plane, right? You'd plot the point 2, 5 or something, and you had to use two numbers to plot a point on a plane, so the location requires two dimensions. Planes are always two-dimensional. And since we've used up capital and lowercase, we are going to use either a cursive or a bold or some sort of scripty capital letter to name a plane. Let's draw one. So usually when I try to draw the floor, I wind up drawing sort of a parallelogram, or if I'm drawing in perspective, maybe it's not quite a parallelogram, but a four-sided shape, and that kind of reminds me of the floor. And then if I wanted to name that, I would use either my bold print or my cursive print or a scripty print, and I could use maybe a cursive L. So then I could call that plane L. Another way to name a plane, you know how 2 points make a line? Well, 3 points make a plane. If you think of like a tripod, that'll sit on a flat surface. Or if you think of a triangle is nice and flat, and if you extend it on forever, it could be a plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick 3 triangle points. We don't want to pick 3 points that are all in the same line. We're going to pick 3 triangle points. So if that was a capital A point, capital B point, capital C point, then I could call this plane ABC, and everyone would know what I was talking about. I could also call it plane CBA, or BAC, or CAB, or how many are there? ACB, or BCA. 3 times 2 times 1, there should be 6 choices for how I could name it with those 3 points. So the order doesn't matter. Let's talk about finally angles. An angle is sort of like a hinge. It's like an opening, right? So one thing I want you to understand is that even though this might be made out of 2 rays that connect at their endpoint, we're not actually talking about the rays being the angle. We're talking about the opening between the rays being the angle. Okay, so those 2 rays split off, but it's this actual opening that we consider to be the angle. Here's how we can name an angle. We can either use that point that is called the vertex. We could also, in case there was lots of angles at that vertex, we could also use 3 points that trace around that corner, making sure the vertex is in the center of those 3 points. And then one more way that you could do it is that you could number that angle. So I'll show you what that might look like. Okay, so let's say if this was a capital V point, and that's the vertex, we could name this, and here's the symbol for it. We could name that angle V. It almost looks like a less than sign. Angle V. Another way we could do it was with 3 points. So if I pick one point on this ray and one point on this ray, maybe point A and point B, capital letters. I could call that angle AVB. Because if I go from A to V to B, I've rounded that corner. Similarly, I could go angle B to V to A, and everybody would know which corner I was going around. Notice that both times I put the V, I put the vertex in the middle. The vertex has to go in the center of those 3 points. And then one more way I could name this, if I had a ton of angles on a picture, maybe I would just label that as angle 3. It's kind of a lazy way to name it. So I wound up doing that a lot. And those are basic pieces of geometry that we're going to be using to build all kinds of other things this year.